A retired canine was pacing the snowy train yard. Then he stopped, ears perked, breath visible in the cold air. There it was. A faint, ragged breath. A human breath, and just beneath the rumble of an approaching train, he heard a heartbeat. When they found him, bound and broken on the tracks, seconds from death, everything changed. What happened next will make you believe in second chances. Not just for humans, but for heroes on four legs too. But before we begin, do you believe dogs can sense what we cannot? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear if your furry companion has ever done something extraordinary. And if you believe no loyal dog should ever be forgotten or left behind, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness might just restore your faith in love, loyalty, and the magic of instinct. It was the kind of morning Montana was famous for. Still, sharp, and muffled by thick curtains of freezing fog. The town of Elkridge, nestled near the Rocky Mountain front, lay quietly beneath a frost-bitten dawn. Snow clung to every rooftop like soft armor, the trees brittle with icicles, and the rail tracks long forgotten by most glistened under a delicate sheen of ice. But something moved through the fog that morning. Something with purpose. Echo, a 7-year-old German Shepherd canine, had once served with the Special Enforcement Division of Cascade County. A powerful figure of muscle and discipline, he now bore scars softened by time, a patch of thinning fur above his right shoulder, a nicked ear, and a slight limp on colder mornings. He had been medically retired after an explosion during a meth raid had torn up his hind leg and killed his handler. Since then, he'd lived a quieter life with Clara Jensen. Clara was in her mid-30s, lean, practical, with weathered hands and the weary eyes of someone who'd seen too many animals come through her vet clinic bleeding or shaking. Her dark brown hair was tied in a loose braid that hung down the back of her parka as she stepped out onto her porch with a hot thermos. She wasn't from Elkridge originally. She had moved here 4 years ago after her younger sister Emily vanished during a road trip through the northern range. That disappearance had dulled the warmth in her smile and left a quiet, iron resolve in her walk. The fog clung thick around her boots. Clara poured a bit of warm broth into Echo's metal bowl. He sniffed at it once, then turned his head sharply to the east toward the rail yard beyond the woods. "Echo?" Clara frowned, but the dog was already gone. There was no barking at first, just a flash of his tan and black fur disappearing into the white. Clara took a few steps forward but didn't call him back. She'd seen that look in his eyes before, hyper-focused, as if a wire had been pulled tight inside him. Through bramble and brush, Echo bounded, nostrils flared, ears pivoting for sound. The scent was faint sweat, blood, something sharp like rust, and it led him straight to the railway bend that hadn't seen a regular train in months. Yet today, a low rumble echoed in the distance, still miles off but coming. Then he saw it. A body male, bound hand and foot with coarse yellow rope, face half covered by a bloodied cloth, lay twisted on the icy tracks. The man wasn't moving much. One leg trembled slightly. His name was Ben Carter, and he'd once been the pride of the Elkridge Sheriff's Department. Ben, 34, was tall, broad-shouldered, with a dusting of ginger-blonde hair matted against his forehead. His uniform shirt was torn, exposing bruised ribs and dried cuts. Known for his quiet integrity and reluctance to play politics, Ben had made enemies during his recent investigation into a human trafficking ring linked to the nearby railway corridor. He had vanished 2 nights ago. No one had found him. Echo bolted forward, paws slipping once on the slick track. He sniffed Ben's face, then growled, low, not in warning, but urgency. The whistle of the train came again, louder this time, closer. The rails began to tremble. Echo bit at the rope. The thick fibers resisted. He braced himself and chewed harder, his powerful jaws working with mechanical precision. Finally, one tie snapped, then another. Ben stirred, groaning. Echo grabbed his collar, teeth careful not to pierce skin, and dragged him off the track with the strength of a creature who refused to leave a man behind. The train screamed by seconds later. Snow and debris flung out in its wake. Echo stood over Ben, tail rigid, breath steaming from his muzzle. Back at the edge of the woods, Clara's truck pulled to a stop. She'd followed the broken brush line until she saw the train, then Echo, and then Ben, alive. Later, inside Clara's warm cabin, Ben lay wrapped in blankets on the old leather couch, a gash above his temple bandaged and his breathing steadier. Echo sat nearby, watchful. Clara moved quickly, checking pulse, stitching cuts, calling the sheriff's office. Through it all, Ben barely spoke. When he did, it was just 2 words, raspy and uncertain. The girl. He didn't remember much else, but Echo hadn't stopped watching the door. He knew the danger wasn't over yet. The scent of antiseptic hung faintly in the air as dawn crept across Clara's cabin, filtered through frost-covered windows. The fire in the stone hearth had died down, leaving behind glowing embers that cast shifting patterns across the walls. Ben Carter stirred on the couch, his breath shallow, fingers twitching against the woolen blanket tucked around him. He had been unconscious for hours since Echo pulled him from the train tracks, but now his eyelids fluttered with the weight of returning thought. Clara sat at the dining table scribbling into her worn field notebook. She had shed her winter jacket, revealing a gray Henley shirt dusted with dog hair and faint stains from the emergency first aid she'd given. Her eyes darted to Ben as he groaned again, this time louder. Echo, sprawled on the rug beside the fire, immediately lifted his head. His ears twitched, and in a single fluid motion, he stood and padded silently over to Ben, his nose nudging gently against the man's wrist. Ben's eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharper, narrowed by pain. He instinctively recoiled from Echo's muzzle before recognizing the dog and the reality crashing in behind the memory of the cold, the rope, and the rails. Clara stood, stepping to his side. "You're safe," she said softly. "You're at my cabin. You were found just in time." Ben tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice came out cracked. "Water," he rasped. Clara fetched a mug and eased it to his lips. He drank greedily. When he finally looked at her, there was confusion in his gaze. "Who?" "I'm Clara Jensen, vet. I live out near the ridge," she answered. "Echo's with me now. He found you." Ben's eyes shifted to the German shepherd whose gaze was steady and unmoving. "I know this dog," he whispered. "He used to work with Pete Vargas, right?" Clara nodded. "He did. Echo's retired now." Ben exhaled slowly, struggling to sit up. His hands shook as he pressed them to his temples. "There was a truck. Black. Window cracked open. I smelled something cigarettes. Cheap ones. And chain links. I think I heard them. Before it all went dark." Clara watched him carefully. "You were tied up. Rope burns, bruises, a pretty bad concussion. You're lucky to be alive." "I was working a case," Ben muttered. "A girl, Amanda Griggs, went missing last week near Junction Road. No family left. Just bounced around the system. I was following a lead, a freight company. Industrial yards near the old station." Clara blinked at the name. "Amanda Griggs? That's the 3rd girl to vanish in 2 months." Ben nodded weakly. This one felt different. There was panic in her voice when she left a voicemail on my burner. Then she disappeared. Echo moved slightly, his nose now pressed to Ben's jacket that lay across the back of the couch. He sniffed, then froze. A low growl vibrated in his throat. Clara turned. "Echo?" The dog growled again and began sniffing deeper into the lining of the coat, then turned to Ben's undershirt crumpled nearby. Clara stepped over and picked it up, holding it to the light. Her brow furrowed. There were faint reddish streaks, almost like old blood, but they weren't shaped like cuts or slashes. More like smears or prints. On the back, just below the neckline, were 2 thin, diagonal rips. "Did something grab you?" she asked. "Or scratch you?" Ben stared at the shirt as if seeing it for the first time. I don't know. Maybe during the struggle. I can't remember." "Those aren't rope burns," Clara murmured, examining the tears. "Something clawed at you." Echo sniffed again and turned to the door, posture rigid, tail straight. He let out one sharp bark, then glanced at Clara, then back at Ben. Clara tilted her head. "He smells something." Ben nodded slowly, the strain showing across his jaw. "Whatever they used to take me, it's still on me. Echo knows." Echo barked again, pacing the door now. Clara moved to the fireplace and stoked the logs. "You need rest, but we also need to know who did this. If it's the same people Amanda was running from, it's not over." Ben leaned back, one hand pressed to his temple again. "There was someone else," he said suddenly. "A voice. Male. Said my name. I think he knew me." Clara turned to him, the fire now crackling again behind her. "Do you remember anything else?" "Just that I wasn't supposed to wake up," he said quietly. "And if Echo hadn't found me." Echo had returned to his spot by the fire, but his head remained up, ears perked, gaze unwavering. His presence filled the room, not just as a dog, but as a sentinel, as something ancient and alert. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing a pale winter sun behind thick clouds. The trees glistened with hoarfrost. Tracks in the snow, made by Echo's earlier run, still led back toward the tree line and the rails beyond. They would fade soon, covered by the next snowfall, but Echo remembered the scent, and he would not forget. The cold had deepened by the time Echo stopped at the edge of the clearing. Ben stood beside Clara, his coat zipped tight, a flashlight in one hand, the other resting on the grip of his service weapon. Echo's ears twitched as he stared ahead, breath forming soft clouds in the frigid dusk. Before them loomed a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of Elk Ridge's old freight yard, long abandoned, swallowed by frost, time, and silence. The warehouse was a remnant of another era, its metal siding rusted, the windows long shattered, and one of the loading bay doors bent out of shape like it had been pried open from the inside. Vines curled through cracks in the foundation, brittle with ice. "This place shouldn't be on any operating map," Ben muttered. "Even the department stopped using it as a checkpoint years ago." Echo didn't wait. The German shepherd pressed forward, tail low and deliberate. Clara followed closely behind, boots crunching on frosty gravel. She had changed into warmer gear, a canvas jacket over a thick turtleneck, her eyes sharp behind fogged-up glasses. A flashlight dangled from her belt. Ben stepped in last, sweeping the entryway with his light. Inside, the warehouse smelled of mildew, oil, and something sharper. Something foul, metallic, buried beneath layers of dust. They moved cautiously through the vast space, beams of light bouncing off rusted shelving, broken crates, and coiled lengths of wire. Echo sniffed along the floor, pausing every few steps to investigate something unseen. When they reached the back wall, he stopped completely. Then he barked. It was sharp, insistent, more than alert. It was a call to attention. Ben moved closer, shining the beam where Echo stood. "There," Clara said, pointing. A panel in the floor, barely distinguishable beneath old carpeting, jutted slightly at one corner. Ben wedged his fingers under the edge and lifted. It groaned with resistance, the hinges rusted but not broken. Underneath, a narrow staircase that vanished into pitch blackness. The air that rose from the basement was stagnant, colder, tinged with something sour. Clara handed Ben a fresh lantern she'd packed. "You're not going alone." He didn't argue. Echo descended first, nose low, every sense engaged. Ben followed, gun drawn. Clara came last, her breath tight in her chest. The basement was unfinished concrete walls stained with age, exposed piping hissing softly. At the far end of the space stood a large cage, taller than a man, 6 feet wide, built from repurposed chain-link fencing welded together. A heavy lock hung open on the floor nearby. The cage door creaked as Ben approached. Inside, the ground was stained dark in places. Old ropes lay tangled near the back corner, and tucked beneath a dirty blanket was something small. A glint of metal. Clara stepped forward and picked it up gently. It was a silver hoop earring, with a tiny blue bead in the center. "That's Amanda's," she whispered. "I saw this exact pair in her missing persons file." Ben crouched beside the blanket. "There's blood, and hair long, brown. He reached for his phone and began snapping photos. Echo, meanwhile, moved toward the far wall. His ears perked, nose up. Then he barked again, 2 quick bursts. He reared slightly, pawing at the ceiling. Ben followed Echo's gaze and saw it. Hidden behind one of the exposed beams was a black object blending almost seamlessly into the ceiling structure. Clara stepped onto an overturned crate to get closer. She pulled it down slowly. "A security camera," she said. "Battery operated. Could have recorded everything." Ben examined it. "No markings, but this is recent. Dust hasn't even settled on it. Whoever was here meant to watch, not forget." Echo let out a low growl, circling the cage once more before sitting at attention beside Ben. Ben turned to Clara. "A year ago, in Granger County, we found another site just like this. Girl tied up in a shed next to train lines. Same kind of materials, same camera setup. She was found unconscious near the tracks 2 days later, no memory, no ID, and no answers." Clara looked around the room. "They're running some kind of cycle. Keep them here, hurt them, then leave them for dead?" Ben nodded grimly. "And Echo pulled me out before I could become the next missing link." They backed away slowly, taking photographs, bagging what they could. The scent of decay lingered behind them. Back at the top of the stairs, Clara paused, turning for one last look into the darkness below. "That cage was never meant to keep animals," she said. "That was for people." Echo nuzzled her hand as they stepped out into the night. The old switch station sat like a forgotten relic on the southern fringe of Elk Ridge, a low, squat building framed by frozen brush and rusting signage. It hadn't seen regular use in over a decade, but a few lines of private freight still passed through on inconsistent schedules. That gave it just enough purpose for someone to hide in plain sight. Ben Carter stood on the far side of the yard, dressed in a faded canvas coat and workman's jeans, his badge and weapon hidden beneath layers. A knit cap pulled low over his ears obscured his familiar features. The bruises on his jawline had begun to fade, but he still walked with the stiffness of recovery. Beside him, Echo crept low, tail down, posture focused. His coat bristled in the cold as he scanned the area. Today, he wasn't just a companion, he was a tracker, a guide, a weapon. Clara had insisted on staying behind at the truck with the engine running. Her breath fogged the windshield as she scanned her laptop, tapping through background reports she'd pulled the night before. She had unearthed something troubling, a name. Ernest Doyle, age 47, once a foreman for Westbound and Hudson Freight Company, the now-defunct private rail contractor. Tall, broad-shouldered, perpetually wearing a grease-stained Carhartt jacket and a Red Sox cap, Doyle was a man known for his short fuse. 2 assault charges, one dropped, the other pleaded down, both involving men who'd trespassed on company property. After the freight company was sued over the unexplained disappearance of a female employee 3 years ago, Doyle had quietly left the rail business and taken a job as groundskeeper at the Elk Ridge switch station. Now he was back in play. Ben crossed the yard slowly, clipboard in hand, feigning the gait of a freelance rail inspector. Echo split off toward the side, weaving behind empty crates and rusted equipment. His paws barely made a sound in the snow. A thin column of smoke rose from the station's chimney. Inside, Doyle sat at a desk littered with receipts, coffee cups, and a stained lunch bag. The man was just as Clara described, broad, tall, shoulders hunched forward like he was always expecting a fight. His beard was patchy, graying unevenly, and a thick scar ran from his left cheekbone to his earlobe. He was thumbing through a stack of forms when Ben knocked. Doyle looked up, eyes squinting. "We're closed." Ben smiled mildly, adopting a Midwestern drawl. "Just doing a check on Sidetrack 8. Got a note about some ballast erosion." Doyle grunted. "Haven't used 8 in months. It's half frozen." "Still," Ben shrugged. "If the paperwork says look, I look. Mind if I poke around your records for a minute?" Doyle didn't move, but his eyes flicked to the wall behind Ben, calculating. "There's nothing here but junk files." Ben nodded, feigned a yawn, then reached for his clipboard. "Mind if I step in to warm up a sec?" Doyle hesitated too long for someone with nothing to hide. Outside, Echo slipped through the side entrance of a small metal storage unit just west of the station. His nose twitched. There it was again, that same scent from the night Ben was taken. Faint, but unmistakable. A mix of burnt oil, gasoline, and sweat. Echo growled low in his throat, pawing gently at the floor near a pile of stacked crates. Inside the switch house, Ben caught the moment Doyle's composure cracked. The man's eyes darted again this time toward a door behind his desk, likely leading to storage. Ben straightened just slightly, enough to shift the tension. "Say, you weren't working the night of the 13th, were you?" he asked. "Why?" Doyle's voice was sharper now. Ben set the clipboard down slowly. "Just routine. Seems there was a disturbance near this yard that night. You asking questions like a cop, not an inspector." Ben smiled. "That's funny, because I am one." Doyle's chair screeched back. His hand darted toward his waistband, but Echo had already heard the movement. The shepherd burst through the door in a blur of tan and black fur, launching forward with a snarl that echoed off the metal walls. Doyle barely had time to stand before Echo collided with him, knocking him backward into the desk. Ben moved quickly, pressing his knee to Doyle's wrist and kicking the pistol out of reach. "You were there," Ben growled, twisting Doyle's arm. "You helped them grab me. You held Amanda." Doyle spat blood, lips split. "You don't know nothin'." Ben glanced at Echo, who stood over Doyle's chest, fangs bared but controlled. The dog's eyes didn't blink. From the outer lot, Clara ran in, clutching a file folder. "I found it," she panted. "Property records from 2020's Doyle signed off on maintenance request for Warehouse 17. The same one we found the cage in. It's under a fake company name." Ben tightened the cuffs on Doyle's wrists. "You're done hiding behind ghosts." Doyle sneered, blood dripping from his chin. "You think I'm the worst one? I'm just a wrench in the machine." Ben's voice was cold. "Then let's tear the whole machine down." Echo barked one short, sharp, final. The cabin was silent, save for the soft hiss of Clara's laptop and the occasional creak of floorboards contracting in the cold. Outside, a light snow had begun to fall again. Soft, dry flakes catching on the bare branches of the spruce trees surrounding the property. Echo sat at the foot of the couch, eyes fixed on the screen as if he too understood the weight of what was unfolding. Clara leaned forward, her fingers trembling slightly as she clicked through the camera's memory card Ben had recovered from the hidden device at the warehouse. The images were grainy, monochrome, but their clarity was merciless. The first photo showed Amanda Griggs, arms bound, her cheek bruised, eyes defiant even in fear. The timestamp placed it 5 days before her disappearance was reported. Ben stood behind her, arms crossed tightly. His face was taut with controlled fury. More photos, more women, all in the same cage, all with identical bindings. One woman had a bloodied lip, another clutched a torn jacket to her chest. But it was the fourth image that made Clara gasp. She leaned in, eyes wide. "That's not possible," she whispered. The woman in the picture had a scar along her jaw, an old bike accident from high school. Her eyes, even swollen, had that same melancholy sharpness. Wavy auburn hair hung limp over her shoulders. The same hands Clara had once held as they played piano as children. Her name had been Emily Jensen. She had vanished 2 years ago without a trace. Ben stepped forward slowly. "Are you sure?" Clara didn't speak at first. Her fingers traced the edge of the screen like it might vanish if she blinked. "That's my sister." A full beat of silence passed between them. Then Clara straightened, shoulders squared. "She's alive. She was there." Ben lowered his voice. "That time stamp was 3 months ago. This operation's been going on longer than anyone knew." Clara nodded. "We're going to find them. All of them." She turned to Echo. "Can you help us, boy?" Echo, as if understanding, let out a soft chuff and trotted over to the pile of evidence on the table. He nudged a crumpled flannel shirt Ben had pulled from the warehouse storage unit left behind by one of the women, maybe even Emily. His nose moved quickly across the fabric, then froze. He sniffed again, ears twitching. Then he moved to the back door, tail swaying once. He barked softly. Ben glanced at Clara. "He's got something." The three of them followed Echo through the snow-laced forest back toward the direction of the rail yard, but deviating slightly southwest toward the river. Echo moved quickly but carefully, pausing every few yards to reassess the scent. The forest was hushed, the only sounds their boots crunching on ice and the soft rustle of falling flakes. It was mid-afternoon, but the sky hung dim, gray, the kind of light that blurred time. They arrived at a small cabin, long abandoned, hidden beneath a canopy of cedar and overgrown vines. The door had been padlocked, but the lock was fresh, too fresh for a building this forgotten. Ben signaled Clara to hang back. He approached slowly, drew his weapon, and peered through the frost-covered window. Nothing moved inside. Echo circled the building. At the rear, he stopped abruptly, growled low, and sniffed near the foundation, then scratched once at the baseboards. Ben joined him. There was a vent half covered in dead leaves, slightly ajar. He knelt, pulling his flashlight. Inside, the narrow space descended into a crawl tunnel, likely part of an old storm shelter system. A piece of torn fabric dark red, stained hung, caught on a nail. Clara stepped closer. "That's the same color as the jacket Emily wore when she left town." Ben folded the fabric and bagged it carefully. "They've been here." Echo barked once, the sound echoing into the woods. They didn't go further that day. Ben took photos. Clara collected soil samples, anything they could analyze for clues. Back at the cabin, she sent the image of Emily to a contact in Helena, someone she trusted in the Missing Persons Bureau. She barely said a word the entire ride home. That night, while Echo slept at the foot of Clara's bed, Ben stared out the window at the woods. Somewhere out there, the machine Doyle had spoken of was still running, still taking women, still hiding them. But now, they had a face, and Echo had a trail. The sky above Elkridge had turned to steel by the time Echo led Ben and Clara back toward the old freight corridor. Thick snow pressed into the valley like a held breath, quieting the forest, softening the crunch of their boots as they approached the mouth of the abandoned transport tunnel. Its stone arch, framed by skeletal pine, loomed like a yawning mouth from another era. The tunnel had once belonged to the Ridgeline Freight Company, long since dissolved after bankruptcy and scandal. Now it was a forgotten artery carved through the mountain dark, unpatrolled, and long since stripped of track. Ben held his flashlight low, its beam trembling slightly as it sliced into the pitch. Clara followed just behind, her hand resting briefly on Echo's back as he stepped forward with a steady, practiced grace. "We're sure this is it?" she whispered. Ben nodded. "Echo's been on the scent since the cabin. He wouldn't lead us here if it was dead." Echo glanced back once, then moved forward, tail level, muscles tense beneath his thick coat. His ears rotated constantly, scanning the echoes in the dark. They descended into the tunnel, where the air was colder and damp with history. Rusted bolts protruded from the stone walls like ribs, and graffiti faded by time barely whispered along the curves of the ceiling. Far ahead, the tunnel sloped subtly downward, vanishing into shadow. About 30 yards in, the beam from Ben's flashlight landed on an old industrial cart turned on its side. Nearby, a stack of pallets half covered by tarp blocked what looked like a corridor splitting off to the right. Echo stopped, his body tense, ears pricked forward. Then he growled. It was low, guttural, and certain. Ben raised his weapon. "Something's here." Before Clara could ask, two figures lunged from the shadows, masked, fast, moving with trained aggression. One tackled Ben to the ground with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. The other went for Clara, but Echo was faster. The German Shepherd launched like a spring-loaded missile. His jaws closed around the attacker's arm mid-swing, teeth sinking through cloth and flesh. The man screamed, dropping a metal pipe. Echo twisted, dragging him down. The impact knocked the mask askew, revealing a man in his 30s with a sunken face, a scar across his nose, and a wildness in his pale eyes. Ben, still on the ground, managed to twist free from his assailant's grip, rolling hard and slamming an elbow into the man's side. He shoved upward, catching the second man's wrist as it came down with a blade. There was a struggle, a crash of limbs and breath, and then Clara struck from behind, using a crowbar she had pulled from the cart pile. The attacker crumpled. Silence returned, punctuated only by heavy breathing and Echo's low growl as he stood over the man he'd subdued. Blood pooled beneath the attacker's arm, but he was alive. Ben cuffed both quickly with zip ties. "Talk!" he ordered. The man under Echo coughed, face contorted with pain. "You're too late," he spat. "They're being moved tonight. South Rail." Ben knelt, pressing the man's injured arm. "Where are they now?" "End of the tunnel," the man gasped. "Hidden depot. We load them there. Daniel runs it all." Clara froze. "Daniel? The owner of Ridgeline?" Ben asked. "He's still alive?" The man gave a crooked grin. "He never left. Just bought a new name and a bigger game." Ben stood slowly. "We need to move. Now." Clara grabbed a nearby map pinned against the tunnel wall, yellowed and water-stained. "There's a junction ahead. If we're lucky, it'll split to a side depot." Echo sniffed again, pawing toward the far end of the corridor. Without waiting, he trotted forward, each step deliberate, a sentinel against the dark. The tunnel narrowed, the ceiling dipping slightly as they followed a path of warped rail ties and crumbling stone. About 300 yards in, the smell changed. Faint antiseptic, diesel, metal. Echo stopped at a small side door built into the wall of the tunnel. It was bolted but rusted. Ben forced it open with a grunt. Inside was a vast underground storage room, dimly lit by a string of flickering industrial bulbs. Old freight crates formed makeshift partitions. On the far end, a temporary holding area was constructed from fencing and tarps. Movement stirred behind the barrier's frightened eyes, soft cries. Women. 7 of them. All huddled, bound, silent, until Ben stepped forward and raised his hands. "We're here to help." One of them, dark-skinned, with dreadlocks and a bruised cheek, stood slowly, eyes wide. "Are you real?" Clara rushed forward, cutting zip ties and murmuring softly to the women as Echo patrolled the perimeter. From behind a crate, Echo let out one sharp bark. Ben followed. On the crate's edge sat a clipboard and several manifests. One had the name Daniel Halverson scrawled across the top. Echo growled again, pointing his snout toward the far wall, another passage leading to a hidden exit. One they hadn't come through. "He's not here," Ben said quietly, "but he left a trail." The snow had thickened into heavy flurries as Ben, Clara, Echo, and the 7 rescued women emerged from the hidden depot. Time was slipping like ice beneath their feet. The masked man's confession echoed in Ben's mind. They're being moved tonight. South Rail. And the manifests confirmed it. One more shipment, one more group of lives being trafficked out of Elkridge under the veil of winter and freight schedules. They didn't have hours, they had minutes. Ben radioed the sheriff's department, voice tight. "We have survivors, we have evidence, but Daniel Halverson's still active. We need units at the South Rail Yard now. He's moving people. We're en route." The dispatcher, a middle-aged woman named Lorraine who had worked Elkridge Communications for nearly 30 years, responded with the urgency of someone who knew the stakes. "Units inbound. ETA 15. Echo barked once, sharp and insistent. His head snapped toward the east, nostrils flaring. "He smells something," Clara said. "Can you track it, boy?" The German shepherd's answer was immediate. He took off down the snowy embankment, his body cutting through the wind like a bullet. Ben and Clara exchanged a look and followed, with the most able-bodied of the survivors helping guide the others to safety where patrol would soon arrive. The trail Echo followed was invisible to the human eye but blindingly clear to him. Layers of scent. Sweat, metal, oil, the faint trace of blood. It led to the back perimeter of Elkridge South Yard, a vast sprawl of track lines, idle engines, and freight cars stacked like steel tombs. Security lights buzzed overhead, pale against the white flurry. Echo paused, nose in the air, then turned sharply toward a row of loading cars near track 17. Ben's heart dropped. That was the platform listed on the manifest. Echo barked twice, quick and sprinted toward the last freight car, one painted dark green with rusted latches and no visible markings. He began pawing furiously at the base. Ben climbed up, flashlight in one hand, service pistol in the other. "It's locked from the outside," he called. Clara, now close behind, helped pry the bolt. It gave way with a groan of metal, and Ben flung the door open. Inside, 4 women sat huddled together beneath threadbare blankets. The cold had turned their skin pale, lips trembling. One of them, face bruised, hands scraped, looked up at Clara and blinked. Her name came out before Clara could even think. Emily? It had been 2 years since Clara had seen her sister in person, but there was no mistaking her. The scar along her jaw, the small birthmark on her neck, both visible even through the grime and trauma. Her eyes, once full of curiosity, now flickered with disbelief. "Clara?" she rasped. Clara clambered inside, dropping to her knees. "I'm here. You're safe now." Emily collapsed into her arms. Ben scanned the rest of the car. No guards, no traps. But the engine attached to the cars was humming faintly. The train was about to move. Echo growled, looking back toward the switch house at the edge of the yard. 3 men stood there, one tall and thin in a black trench coat, flanked by 2 heavier figures in winter gear. The tall man stepped forward. Even at this distance, Ben recognized the posture, the self-satisfied gait. Daniel Halverson. Ben descended the freight car and whispered into his radio. "Visual confirmation. Halverson at the switch house. Do not engage until backup arrives." But Echo had no intention of waiting. He bolted toward the men, barking furiously. The sound cracked through the yard like gunfire. Daniel turned, saw the dog charging, and ran. The 2 bodyguards drew weapons. Ben shouted, "Gun! Cover fire!" and raised his sidearm. Clara ducked behind a rail post, still holding Emily close. One of the bodyguards fired 2 rounds, echoing through the air, but missed as Echo veered and leapt, landing squarely on the shooter's chest. The man hit the ground hard, his pistol skittering away into the snow. Ben closed the distance, wrestling the second gunman down and snapping cuffs on him with practiced speed. Daniel reached the far gate, but 2 sheriff's deputies arriving in force intercepted him, pinning him against the chain-link fence. His coat flared open, revealing a custom pistol holstered inside. "Drop it!" a deputy screamed. Daniel smirked but obeyed, lifting his hands slowly. Moments later, the yard buzzed with red and blue lights as more units arrived. Survivors were led to ambulances. Paramedics checked vitals. Clara refused to leave Emily's side as they wrapped her in heat blankets and checked for signs of exposure. Ben found Echo sitting calmly beside the first bodyguard, ears perked, chest rising slowly with each breath. His muzzle was spotted with flecks of snow and blood, but his eyes were steady. "You saved them, partner," Ben whispered, crouching to scratch behind Echo's ear. "You saved them all." Echo leaned into his hand. Winter began to loosen its grip on Elk Ridge. Snow still clung to rooftops and pine branches, but the air carried the first whispers of thaw, and the sunrise came earlier with every passing day. The rail yard was quiet now, emptied of danger, reclaimed by stillness. But something had changed beneath the quiet. It wasn't just the steel or snow that had shifted, it was the town itself. 2 weeks had passed since the final takedown at South Yard. In that time, Daniel Halverson and his remaining associates had been arraigned in federal court. The charges filled pages: human trafficking, kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and conspiracy. The strength of the evidence camera footage, manifests, witness testimony was impossible to ignore. And the photo that captured a German shepherd pulling a bloodied officer from a railway line had become a symbol across Montana. The caption, bold and heartfelt, read, "Four-legged hero saves officer from death." That officer, Ben Carter, now stood at the center of the Elk Ridge Town Square beneath a bright blue sky, dressed in his full uniform, tie neatly pressed, hair combed for the first time in days. He stood tall but uneasy, the kind of man uncomfortable with applause. The mayor, a petite woman with silver hair and a voice that commanded attention, held the microphone with both hands. Today, she said, pausing for the murmurs to settle, we honor courage, loyalty, and the kind of partnership that reminds us why we fight for what is right. She motioned for Echo. The German shepherd stepped forward with calm dignity, led by Clara, who had brushed his coat until it shone like riverstone in the morning sun. Echo's eyes scanned the crowd, posture straight, ears alert. The children near the front waved small flags. One held a drawing of Echo's face with a heart around it. The mayor knelt, pinning a small silver medallion to the custom-made leather collar Clara had gifted. It shimmered against Echo's chest. "Echo," she said, voice thick with emotion. "In the face of darkness, you chose light. You saved lives, restored hope, and reminded us all of what a true hero looks like." The crowd applauded soft at first, then rising like a tide. Echo blinked slowly and let out a single, calm bark. That night, Clara and Ben sat on the porch of her cabin. The fire pit crackled beside them. Echo lay curled at their feet, his head resting on Ben's boot. Emily, her arm still bandaged but healing, worked quietly in the kitchen with a young woman named Sophie, another survivor who had refused to return to the city and instead offered to help them. They were building something now. Clara had used her savings to lease a small farmhouse on the edge of town, an old schoolhouse with bright windows and worn floors. It would become the Hollow Creek Center for Recovery, offering long-term trauma support and housing for victims of trafficking. She had a vision for it: therapy dogs, art classes, warm meals, and, above all, safety. Emily, once too broken to speak, had begun painting again. Her brush strokes were soft, tentative, but beautiful. Her strength returned one day at a time. Ben had formally adopted Echo through the sheriff's department, filing the paperwork himself. The badge number on Echo's collar now matched his own. They were listed as official partners in Elkridge K-9 Patrol, though everyone in town already treated them like legends. Each morning, Ben and Echo made their rounds checking in on neighbors, walking the length of Main Street, stopping at the school where Echo would greet children like a celebrity. On snowy days, Echo would plop himself in front of the town bakery until the owner, Mr. Keller, slipped him a biscuit and winked. But it was more than routine. It was restoration. "Do you think they'll ever recover?" Clara asked one night, her voice quiet as steam rose from her mug. Ben looked toward the horizon, the last edge of the sun slipping beneath the trees. "I think they already are," he said. "Because you didn't give up. Because Echo didn't give up. And because maybe neither did I." She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "He saved you first." Ben looked down at Echo, now snoring softly with his paw twitching in a dream. "Yeah," he said. He really did. Behind them, wind whispered through the trees like a blessing. The world hadn't gone back to normal. It had become something better. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in grand gestures or parting skies. They come on four legs, wrapped in fur, with loyal eyes and a heart that never gives up. Echo wasn't just a dog. He was a vessel of hope, sent not by accident, but perhaps by divine design. In a world where darkness often hides in plain sight, it takes courage to listen, compassion to act, and faith to believe that healing is possible. This story reminds us that no one is ever too far gone to be saved, and no pain is too deep for God to redeem. Whether it was Ben pulled from the tracks or Clara reunited with her sister, each moment was a whisper from heaven. You are not forgotten, and maybe today someone watching this needs to hear that too. You are not forgotten, so if this story touched your heart, I ask you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with amen if you believe every soul deserves to be rescued, loved, and restored. And if you believe that God can use anyone, even a wounded dog, to work miracles, then please subscribe, comment your thoughts, and join us in spreading stories of faith, love, and second chances. May God bless you, and may you always be found, no matter how lost the path may seem.